Right, welcome to another of these impromptu John Dawes views on YouTube, and this one is sort of touching on the first one a little bit, where I've had some responses, some comments from Jones's, which were suggesting about that we were closer to Aldous Huxley's vision of the future, or maybe even George Orwell's 1984, as opposed to Huxley's Brave New World, than the H.G. Wells that I mentioned. Although I was only mentioning that because of the thing that he said about the way to get to utopia, or whether it was accredited to Wells, whether it really was, I'm not quite sure. Also, Jones mentioned that a way to get there would be through Christ. Obviously, I'm a Muslim, so we differ on that type of view. And that's the next subject that I was going to go on to, that we'll bridge onto this as well. In the sense that, if there are millions of Christians, Muslims, Jews, and lots of other different religions out there already, if they actually did follow their books, the Torah, the Bible, the Quran, New Testament, and all the other religious books, then we would be living in that utopia, because God has already given us that wisdom. It's not that He's taken it away from us. He's actually made it quite clear that we should look after one another, each other, our brothers, our sisters, that we should live a certain lifestyle, that we should live a certain way. All the religious texts talk about peace and tolerance, and talk about making oneself better, and giving alms and charity, and if you look in that's why it always amazes me that people are against religion, because I know a lot of it's due to uneducation, but if you actually look within religious texts, a lot of it is actually good morals that's being taught in there. Obviously, as some people misread certain bits or take out of context other bits and misinterpret bits, but the general gist of what religion is all about is actually making humanity more humane. And if that's the bit I differ with Jones, is that we actually do have all that knowledge, and we do have the capacity to follow that knowledge if we chose to. And there is a reason. What is the reason why God has given us the Torah, the New Testament, the Quran, and all the other religious texts? Why has He given us all these things? Not to wait idly around, but to actually follow them. Unfortunately, the problem is that you get some people who do actually really follow them properly, but unfortunately you get a vast majority that don't. And the altruistic point that Jones mentioned is the important thing. That's the point that a lot of people, humanity generally is very selfish, which is probably why in a lot of these religious texts God talks about the need for us to change ourselves, for us to keep an eye on ourselves. That's in Islam, it's jihad. A lot of people misinterpret jihad as it actually means striving, and there's three different ones, and the lowest is actually war, which is a defensive war, not an aggressive war, only to defend one's faith. And the highest jihad is actually striving to better oneself, to end the Satan within you, and that getting rid of the evil things, or the sins, or the bad practices that you follow, which is the main point of most religious people, is to actually practice what you preach, and that's the important thing. And if we all did that, or even if those who claim, and I don't mean those who actually are born into a religion and then don't actually really follow it, but I mean the actual ones who actually claim that they are followers of that faith and would defend it any other way, then if they were actually to practice what they preach, what is in their religious text, then we would be living in that utopia. And I'm sure there's a lot of powerful people, whether they're Christians or Muslims or Jews in the world, who are in places of power that must compromise the things that they claim to believe. Unfortunately, it's the problem of actually really believing and really putting into practice what you believe. And then we could live in that utopia. So I don't believe that it's waiting for any specific person. Obviously from an Islamic point of view, we believe in the promised Messiah and Christ's return, but in spirit, not in actual the same person, but the spirit of the man and Messiah, as it were, promised Messiah. That obviously I already believe that's happened. Not all Muslims do. Obviously that's a different point of view. and I'm only putting across my point of view. I'm not trying to suggest anyone else's is incorrect or wrong or unvalid or anything like that. All I'm trying to say is my view. Obviously, that's all I can possibly do, and so that basically answers that subject of utopia, that I believe it is possible, even if you do believe in waiting for Christ to come, the day of judgment, as it were, as in Revelations. I still believe it is possible to make a heaven on earth, and I still believe that should be man's mission, and I believe that is why God has given us all these ways in these religious texts to enhance ourselves, and we've strayed a lot from actually following those things, and maybe that's why we live in the dystopia that we do now, who knows. But otherwise, then what's the point of these religious texts? And what's the point of these things? It's not like it's beyond man to follow these things, far from it. We could easily follow these instructions. And on the basis of religion, I was going to talk about, obviously, so you know that now that I'm a Muslim, and I follow Islam, and there's a lot of misconceptions about that. Jihad I touched on already, that it's only supposed to be a defensive war, and it's only meant to be if you can't propagate your faith, and there's probably nowhere in the world where there is such a place where you're not allowed to practice your faith. So jihad is almost impossible unless you get a sort of German Nazi regime where they say you can't do that. Then it's possible for jihad, though there's lots of restrictions and lots of things that take place, and often these things are misinterpreted by certain people who like violence, and unfortunately the media likes to encourage bad Muslims, or those who are so-called Muslims, to get the attention as opposed to the good ones. I believe in heaven and hell, but the learning that I have of heaven and hell is heaven is eternal, and hell is a place where you are put, where your soul is made rid of the sins that you've committed. Obviously, that depends on how much, and obviously time and space. Who knows? You can't really. What's one day here might not be one day in heaven and hell. So obviously different amounts for different people. We can't judge upon that. We're just given similes in religious texts of how it will be. And I know there's an interesting point that I mentioned on Blog TV to someone when they asked about, the Prophet was asked, where is heaven and hell? And he said it's here, right here. And he meant the earth. In this place, and that's quite interesting. That was 1,400 years ago that he mentioned that concept, which wouldn't have been understood then, but now can be understood through science fiction, through the idea of parallel universes, or something that can exist in the same dimension or space, but not the same time, a different time, or a parallel universe. So it could be regarded in that. So we would be able to understand that how could something be in two places at exactly the same place? How could heaven and hell and the earth be exactly the same place? But it's obviously different time or spatial, a different space, time, coordinate, or whatever. So that was quite interesting. And also the idea of that how life is here was mentioned in the Quran as a simile of being in the womb. Whereas if you look at when you're in the womb, you're being moulded and turned into a baby, and then you're born into the world. And then it's given the idea of the world being like a womb, and that your soul, your body is that womb, and your inside is your soul, and that's being made ready by the actions that you do, good or bad, is being turned into a white soul, one that's good, and a darker soul for one that's got more sin in it. So you're actually the womb, and inside that soul is being moulded like when you're in your mother's womb. And then when you die, you go on to the next phase, which is when you're born again, as it were, into a place where in the Quran it mentions barzuk, which means a barrier in between. So you're not in heaven and hell, but not on earth, and you're in between. And that's when you wait for the day of judgment, and then it's decided whether you go to heaven forever or hell for a time until your sins are all burned away by means of punishment, I assume, or whatever. And the reason for that hell not being forever is if you believe in God being just, how would he be able to do that? Anyway, that's enough on religion and faith, and that's given you a little bit of a taster and answer some of the questions that Jonesy mentioned in John Doyle's View 1. Thank you all for listening, and hopefully we shall have some more of these. Please do give your comments and any more suggestions of what you'd like to hear. Peace and take it easy.